Welcome to Advance One Thing, the show where I invite a guest to tell me the one thing that they wish they'd known when they first started sharing their faith. So excited about today's guest. Can't even get my words out. I'm Ben Jack, and joining me today is the incredible Justin Brierley. Justin, how are you?
I'm well, thank you, Ben. Thank you very much for this invitation. I've been really looking forward to spending a bit of time with you here.
Well, we're so happy to have you on here, especially because you're a pro in the world of all of this. Tell us very quickly a little bit about what you do and why your setup right now looks so much better than mine.
Well, it's not a competition, first of all, Ben. But yeah, I've been privileged to, when we went into lockdown, I was used to doing everything from our radio studio at Premier in London, including a nice sort of video setup and everything. And although we can't replicate that here, we had to pretty quickly pivot to trying to produce reasonably high quality looking materials for the shows we were producing. So we were able to put in some fancy lights and a nice camera and that kind of thing. It's amazing what you can do with a spare bedroom, isn't it? Once you've added a few LED lights. But anyway, so that's the reason. And yeah, it still continues, even though, lockdown is, come to an end. A lot of people are still kind of doing the working from home thing for various reasons. And I still record a lot of shows right here from our spare room, and it works, we live in the age of Zoom now and people are used to doing it that way. So it's a good way of doing it.
Absolutely. If people want to check out that show and all of the content that you guys are putting out through Premiere and Unbelievable, they can do that via the links in the description below. And while you're there, of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give us a little like, leave a comment. I mean, Justin's the perfect person to leave a question for. It's a question that may have already been answered on one of the shows. It's a question that he might suddenly be inspired by and think, I need to get some guests on to talk about that very question. So do leave a question in the comments below and we will pass all of those on to Justin. Right, Justin, let's get into it straight away. This is the One Thing podcast. So what is the one thing that you wish you had known when you first started sharing your faith?
The one thing I wish I had known when I started sharing my faith is that actually we all come into the world with a faith of some sort, by which I would say, something like a worldview, a way of interpreting the world. Because I think when I started out as a Christian and I felt the urge, the need to share my faith with others, I felt like all of the onus was on me to answer all the questions people had. And basically, I had to persuade them into my way of seeing things, and that all of the burden of proof, if you like, was on my shoulders on that front. I was the one with these weird claims about God and Christianity and Jesus, and everyone else was sort of neutral out there, kind of just minding their own business, doing their own thing. And here was I coming along trying to persuade them to believe something completely different. I think something really strange in the process of doing my Unbelievable show and having lots of conversations with Christians and non-Christians, I came to realize actually that's not the way it is. Actually, we all come to life with a worldview. Now, and very frequently, the people that I'm interacting with on the show are people who are atheists, and you might call their worldview very frequently naturalism or physicalism or materialism. But basically, it's the view that all that actually exists is matter in motion, energy, the laws of the universe, that ultimately everything can be reduced down to that. And what I realized was, well, that's interesting because that's another way of looking at the world. I've got my way, I'm a Christian, but other people have this other way of looking at the world. But they need to be able to explain that one. They need to explain why they believe that, how they would defend that, because it's not immediately obvious that that's the way the world is. That's there's a lot of assumptions that have gone into that particular way. If you're a Richard Dawkins kind of atheist of looking at the world, and actually I might have quite a lot of questions about what you believe. So just as it's fine for someone to ask me why I believe what I believe, and if I've got good reasons for doing it, I'm just at liberty to ask an atheist, why do you believe that about the world? What makes you think that that's the way the world is? And the more I've done that, I've realized, and really wrote a book on it, that actually there's all kinds of things about that way of looking at the world that don't jive with our actual experience, that don't jive with, firstly, the universe I actually do see around us, that don't make sense of some of the sense I have of who I am and what's important in life, that don't make sense of the kind of meaning and purpose that most people sort of ascribe to life. And so it was really in coming to see that I don't have to prove Christianity to someone, but I can have a conversation with the fact that we both have different ways of looking at the world, and that we've both got access to the same kind of data out there. And the question is, well, whose worldview fits best with the data that's
Mm.
out there? Is it the Christian story, or is it this sort of atheist naturalist story? And once I realized that, it was a real kind of penny dropping moment where I just was able to kind of feel the pressure lift a little bit from my shoulders and realize we're all coming at life with different perspectives, with different assumptions, with these different worldviews. The question is, which worldview makes best sense of what's out there? And
Right.
what I found in the process is that I don't have to prove that Christianity is true, but I can say it makes more sense to me than this way of looking at the world or that way of looking at the world, because that's all we've got to work with at the end of the day is the different ways we approach things. And for me, that's been a really helpful way of kind of approaching the conversations about faith, is to say, let's find out what this person actually believes before I go in trying to kind of prove my particular
Right.
perspective on the world.
Right. It's fascinating that the kind of default or neutral position that a lot of people assume is no faith position, which of
Mm,
course we know that nobody has a no faith position. Everybody believes in something. Everybody has a worldview. Everybody's making assumptions, just like you said. Where do you think that comes from? This idea that religious faith is this unique faith position, and everybody else is neutral, and the neutral position is no faith of any variety.
yeah.
Where do you think that comes from?
I think it's come from a very successful sort of PR campaign that began probably with the Enlightenment onwards, but where basically people have said, uh, essentially they've put up this idea that science and rationalism is somehow tied to a kind of no faith position, a kind of, and
Mm,
the problem is, I think that a lot of the time we've Christianity hasn't helped itself by
mhm.
often being quite anti-intellectual, and therefore giving people the impression that faith is some kind of extra thing you have to have beyond reason and the intellect to kind of be able to believe in God or that sort of thing. Whereas actually,
Mm,
if you actually look back in the history of Christianity, you'll see that they've always interlocked, the idea of faith and reason. And you realize very quickly, once you actually study science or anything else, that actually everyone has a certain level of quote unquote faith in whatever they're doing.
right.
That you can't, you have to make some basic assumptions about the way reality is in order to begin anything, including science. And so, but for whatever reason, in the public consciousness, there's been this very successful sort of narrative that's been spun that basically uh, Christians are the ones making strange, outrageous
Mm,
claims,
mm,
and that if you just sort of have a kind of agnostic / no faith position, you're kind of basically in the kind of the sensible camp where you're not
right.
kind of making any crazy. But
Right.
that's the point is that what I think the problem is that people so often don't even interrogate their own assumptions. They just assume that what they believe about the world is kind of the norm, when actually there's all kind. As soon as you start digging, you realize that, well, yeah, I believe in human rights and equality. Okay, well, why? And then people say,
Mm,
well, it's
mm,
just obvious, isn't it? And I'm like, well, no, not to a lot of people in the history, not to a lot of people in other parts of the world today. Uh, could it be that, there's a specific, that's not a neutral thing, that there's a very specific reason why you have that belief, and why it might make more sense that you have that belief as someone who's inherited this Christian worldview essentially in the
mm.
West, than just that it's come to you somehow from science and reason, which it hasn't.
Right.
Frankly, it really hasn't. So I think as soon as you start to dig into some of that stuff, you realize it starts to just pick away at people's just assumptions they've made, that
Yeah.
theirs is the natural, normal, somehow default position, and when it actually never is. We always inherit so many of our beliefs from what's gone before us.
Absolutely. I think the danger with some of this stuff is that we can end up being put on the back foot when we're not expecting certain things to come our way, and we are buying into the assumptions that other people have made, and then we're constantly feeling like perhaps we're on the back foot. And that the danger with that is that we then
Mm,
attempt to correct that by
mm,
going on the offensive and putting and kind of doing the opposite and putting people on the back foot themselves
yeah.
by asking, well, have you thought about your assumptions and predispositions and cultural heritage that might speak into your worldview? How do we find the right balance by being prepared for the things that might come our way, so we're not constantly on the back foot, but also as we lovingly and gently ask back to the world these questions, that we're not just going on an offensive that actually puts people on the back foot, which doesn't generally, in my experience,
Mm,
lead to good
mm.
dialogue happening.
Yeah, I think it's all about the way you do it, obviously,
Mm.
and you're not seeking to catch someone out or, basically
Yeah.
win an argument. And that's always the danger with apologetics, is it just turns into a point scoring exercise. And so, I can't really do much better than 1 Peter 3:15, which is always be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks you about the reason for the hope that you have. So there's a bit of getting ready there. There's a bit of actually being prepared. And if you think you're going to have conversations which are going to involve people asking tough questions, do a bit of research, find out, how you could best respond to that, but do it with gentleness and respect. So
Mm.
it's about the way you conduct that conversation in the end, and not kind of treating someone just as, someone to be defeated in a war of intellects, but to genuinely be open, when you ask that question, what do you believe about such and such, to be genuinely open to sort of seeing what they say and why they believe it, and what your response would be to it, and not kind of making them feel like you're there to just sort of, I don't know, deconstruct their
Right.
worldview, but to gently probe it, and in the process, if the questions are coming back at you, to say how your worldview potentially does make a bit more sense of some of those views they have, or the way that the universe is set up, or whatever it might be, and so on. So yeah, it so much of it is actually kind of in the practice of doing it that you learn.
Mm.
You make mistakes, obviously, as you do it, and partly that was why I wanted to do the Unbelievable show, and the big conversation videos that we do and everything else, because it's a way of hopefully modeling that, giving people a little bit of a sense of, okay, this is what a good conversation could look like. Sometimes they aren't such good conversations, so it's a model of what goes when it goes wrong.
Sure. Sure.
And you do get more of a kind of argy-bargy sort of thing, but hopefully it's a little way of showing people what a good faith kind of conversation would look like, when you're generating more light than heat, as it were.
Yeah, I like that expression, a good faith conversation, because we want to have conversations about what good faith actually looks like, but also to do it in the spirit of good faith as well, and how, which, like you say, aligning up with 1 Peter 3:15 is very powerful. As we finish up, then, what would be a question that you might think is a good way, or a good turn of phrase, perhaps, that's generally a good gateway into getting people exploring their own assumptions and presuppositions and predispositions? Something that you're having a conversation with somebody in, maybe is a simple question that you can use to ask somebody that will just help them to see that the assumptions here aren't one-sided, that they themselves may have things that they haven't properly considered.
Yeah, I think a lot of that would depend on, where we got to in a conversation, and ideally I'd be probably talking about something specific, that they've already said is an important aspect of their life. I remember having a conversation like this just in my back garden with someone whose daughter was a Christian, but she wasn't, and we just sort of started chatting, and it was evident that she kind of just, didn't get Christianity. She was just sort of like, I didn't feel like sort of trying to talk to her about Jesus and the historicity of the Gospels or anything like that would kind of be a really, and so we just ended up chatting about the things she does love, and she loves her family, and she loves her kids, and she, and that was a way into just gently probing sort of, where does that come from? Why are we so,
Right.
why do we
Yeah.
love our kids so much? Do you think that's just sort of just like nature, that's,
Yeah.
kind of, the genetic impulse to kind of love kids? Or it doesn't feel like that, though, does it? We just had that kind of conversation, and I think that's often the way in. It's just to say, why do you feel like that? What's
Yeah.
your, where do you think that comes from? Just, and again, trying not to sort of specifically steer it down a very specific, direction, but I think that inevitably people, once it's attached to something that's meaningful to them, because to be honest, the moral argument isn't going to be meaningful to someone if it's just given like that. But when it's attached to something they're really passionate about, then yeah, it makes sense to start talking about that, and asking, why do we even, believe this stuff, and then I think, and I think you do this all the time, Ben, in the way that your approach to evangelism is, I feel it is a really helpful example of that, of finding the thing that people are passionate about, and then taking it from there. So yeah.
Beautiful. Justin, thanks so much. Super helpful today. And if you want to connect more with Justin, you could do so at all of the links below. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of these great conversations. And we will see you next time.